Today I want to talk about chapter 14, the spinal cord anatomy and physiology. First, you need to know some general information and general function about your spinal cord and the spinal nerve. The first function is this. Our spinal cord has the structural and functional link between the brain and the rest part of our body. It means that if you have any problem, any pressure, any stimulation in your feet, in your hands, in the wall of your abdomen, in different parts of your body, this is the function of your spinal cord to collect this information from the spinal nerves and bring them to your brain, and after that your brain can do integration. So we have in this part of our nervous system, we have some sensory input from different parts of our body, and we have some motor command from our brain which goes to different parts. And the other function of our spinal cord is making spinal reflexes. I will talk about reflexes next time for you, but you need to know that the reflexes are some automatic, non-predictable response which we have to different stimulation. For example, I flash a light on your eyes. After some seconds, after 30 seconds, 40 seconds, you see that the pupil of your eye start to go to constriction, and it becomes smaller and smaller. This is the meaning of pupil reflex. When you are walking and you step on a sharp object, immediately you take your feet back. This is the meaning of spinal reflexes, and I will talk about it next time for you. The reflexes are a very fast reaction, non-predictable reaction without any thinking to different types of stimulation, and this is the function of our spinal cord. In this picture, you can see the spinal cord which is located in our vertebral column. Our spinal cord starts from the medulla oblongata, the last part of our brain, and it's located in our vertebral column. We have four major parts for our spinal cord. The first part is called cervical region. The second part is called thoracic region. After that, we have lumbar part, and the last part of our spinal cord is called sacral part of our spinal cord. And the sacral part of our spinal cord ends at the level of lumbar vertebrae number 1. So you need to know that the length of your spinal cord and the length of your vertebral column are not equal. Our spinal cord ends sooner than our vertebral column, and it ends at lumbar vertebrae number 1. So this is about the length of our spinal cord. The diameter of the spinal cord is different in different regions. In most of the regions, the spinal cord is very narrow, but in two parts, the spinal cord becomes enlarged. One of them is called cervical enlargement, the enlargement which we have in the cervical region, and the other one is called lumbosacral enlargement or lumbar enlargement, which we have it in the lumbar part of our spinal cord. I'm talking about this enlargement in our spinal cord. So the spinal cord becomes enlarged in the cervical region and also in the lumbar part or lumbosacral part. When you look at the spinal cord, as I told you, we have these different regions. We have cervical region here, we have thoracic region, we have lumbar region, we have sacral region, and we have one coccygeal region or caudal region. From each of these parts, we have some pairs of spinal nerves come out. From the cervical part of our spinal cord, we have 8 pairs of spinal nerves. From the thoracic part, we have 12 pairs of spinal nerves. From the lumbar part, you have 5 pairs. From the sacral part, we have 5 pairs. And from the coccygeal or the caudal part, we only have 1 pair of spinal nerve. All of them together can make 31 pairs. And all of these nerves are mixed nerves. I hope you remember from the brain chapter. In the brain chapter, we talked about our cranial nerves. Some of our nerves are sensory nerves. It means that they can bring information to our brain. Some of our nerves are called motor nerves. It means that it can bring the comment of our brain to different parts of our body. And some of our nerves are called mixed nerves. It means that they can carry both sensory and motor nerves. But all of the nerves which we have for our spinal cord are mixed nerves. It means that they can carry both sensory and motor nerves. I hope you remember what is the meaning of nerve. Nerve are the extension of axons in our peripheral nervous system. These axons in the central nervous system are called tracts, and you need to know the differences between a tract and nerve. Again, in this picture, you have these different parts, and if you check your own PowerPoint, you can see all of these parts in different colors. The first one is called cervical part. After that, you have thoracic part, which is the longest one. Then we have the lumbar, sacral part of our spinal cord, and we have 1 pair of coccygeal nerve, which come out of the last part of our spinal cord. I want to go back to this previous slide. Look at this picture. If you look at this picture, you see that the last part of our spine become pointed and little tapered. This tapered part of a spinal cord is called conus medullaris. So the tapered part of a spinal cord at the end is called conus medullaris. And you can see that it ends at the level of lumbar vertebrae number 1. If you remember from the vertebral column, between 2 adjacent vertebrae, we have 1 vertebral foramen in each side. Vertebral foramen in the right side and vertebral foramen in the left side. From each of these vertebral foramen, as you see in this picture, only 1 spinal nerve can come out. Now, your spinal cord ends at the lumbar vertebrae number 1, but you still many spinal nerves here which wants to come out of your vertebral column. So all of them are located in the last part of your vertebral column and make the appearance like the tail horse, and we call it coda equina. Look at this picture again. In this picture, you can see the tapered part of your spinal cord, which we put 1 pin inside. We call it conus medullaris. And all of these spinal nerves, which are located in the last part of your vertebral column, and they are waiting for vertebral foramen to come out, are coda equina. This coda equina is composed of the spinal nerve of your lumbar part of a spinal cord, L1 to L5, sacral part of your spinal cord, S1 to S5, and the caudal part or the coccygeal part number 1. All of them are located here, and one by one they can come out of your vertebral column and go to different parts of the body which wants to do innervation. Again, in this picture, you can see the spinal cord in the vertebral column. You see that the diameter of your spinal cord, which is yellow in color, is less than the diameter of your vertebral foramen here. So our spinal cord is somehow can move in the foramen, in the canal of our spinal cord. Vertebral column, and we don't need this movement. We want our spinal cord to be fixed in its own place. Because of that, we have one strand which is green in this picture. I will talk about this strand later for you, but for now, you need to know that this strand is coming from the pia mater, and the pia mater is the first layer of meninges which can cover our brain and the spinal cord and attach completely to the surface of the brain and the spinal cord. These pia mater start from conus medullaris and attach to coccygeal bone or caudal bone. And from this part, our spinal cord becomes fixed in its own place in our vertebral column. So it cannot tangle in our vertebral column. This thin strand, which is green in this picture, has a unique name. We call it filum terminale. So the filum terminale is a very thin strand of pia mater which can help attachment of the conus medullaris to our coccygeal bone for prevention of movement of our spinal cord in the vertebral column. The meaning of nerve is here. The nerve is cable-like bundle of our axon. And you remember that we have some tissue wrapping around our nerve. Each axon is covered by areolar connective tissue, which we call endonuria. A group of axons come together and they are covered by thicker connective tissue, which we call it perinuria. This perineurium can make bundle or fascicle of our nerve. And a group of bundles are covered by epineurium, and the epineurium is thicker and denser than perineurium. So from inside to outside, we have endo, peri, and epineurium, and they become thicker and thicker. They become denser and denser when they go out. And you know that all of this connective tissue wants to bring blood vessels to our nerves because our nerves need to receive oxygen, need to receive many nutrients for their function and for making ATP. And we have 31 pairs of spinal nerves. The name of the nerves are with the first letter of our spinal cord region. I told you that in the cervical part, we call the nerve C1 to C8. In the thoracic part, we call them T1 to T12. In the lumbar part, we call them L1 to L5, and in the coccygeal part, we call it C1. Now, I want to talk about the spinal nerve growth anatomy, and I will talk about this slide in this picture. First, in this picture, you see that we have two parts in our spinal cord, in the cross section of the spinal cord. One part is located inside. This is the gray matter of our spinal cord, which is very similar to the structure of the shape of butterfly. And the other part is white matter, which is located outside. It's different and it's opposite to our brain. In the brain, the gray matter is outside and the white matter is inside. In the spinal cord, the gray matter is inside and the white matter is outside. And this spinal cord, the shape is similar to our butterfly as you see in this picture. Our butterfly has different parts. Let me bring a bigger picture here for you. Let me find here. Look at this picture. This butterfly has different parts. It has two wings which are located up. These two wings which are up in my picture and its posterior or back in our body is called posterior or dorsal horn of our spinal cord. So here you have dorsal horn. The other part of our butterfly or the gray matter is located anterior or ventral, or in my picture, it's located in the bottom. We call these two parts anterior gray horn or ventral horn of our gray matter. The right side of our spinal, the gray matter, and the left side are connected together by a gray commissure. The gray commissure is this part which can attach the right and left side together. And in the center of gray commissure, you can see a hole. This hole is called central canal of the spinal cord. And in this central canal, we have cerebrospinal fluid. When you want to identify the posterior horn and the anterior horn, or the dorsal or ventral horn, you need to pay attention to the shape. The posterior horn is a little thinner and it can attach to the border. But the anterior horn is little thicker, it's fat, and it cannot attach the border, as you see here. The white matter which we have around the gray matter is divided into four parts. The first part of white matter is located in the dorsal part. We call it dorsal or posterior white column. The other name, posterior white column, is dorsal or posterior funiculus. The ventral part of our gray matter is called anterior white column or anterior or ventral funiculus. And on both sides, here and here, you can see lateral white column, lateral funiculi. I will talk about it in this different white part. We have different types of nerve tracts, which I will talk about it later for you. So this is the cross section of our spinal cord. This cross section has one butterfly or one gray matter in the center, and you can see white matter around the gray matter. Your gray matter has two sides, right side and left side. Each of your side has one dorsal and one ventral horn. Right and left side are connected together by the gray commissure, and in the center of gray commissure, you can see central canal. And your white matter is divided into four parts. One of them is called posterior or dorsal column. One of them is called anterior or ventral column. And two of them on both sides are called lateral columns. Instead of column, you can use the term of funiculus. In the dorsal column, you have one sulcus. This sulcus is called posterior median sulcus. And in the anterior column, you can see one deep sulcus, which we call it fissure. This fissure is called anterior median fissure. So this is the structural organization of the spinal cord. I go back to our previous slide. Again, in this picture, you can see the spinal cord, you can see the gray matter inside and the white matter around it. Your gray matter is like butterfly. It has two posterior or dorsal horn, which is thinner and longer, and it reaches the border. You can see two ventral or anterior horns, which are thicker and they cannot reach the border. And between the right side and left side, you have gray commissure, and in the center of gray commissure, you have central canal full of cerebrospinal fluid. And you can see white matter around. Your white matter is divided into dorsal or posterior column, ventral or anterior column, and two lateral columns on both sides. Now, I want to talk about the function of our spinal cord now. You need to know that all the senses from different parts of your body come to the dorsal or posterior horn of your spinal cord. You can see it by the blue line here. This blue line can show you sensory nerves or sensory part of your spinal cord. This sensory part, the sensory information which goes to the dorsal horn of your spinal cord has a name. We call them posterior or dorsal root. All of them can bring senses to your spinal cord. The senses come to your spinal cord by these posterior roots. Then the integration take place in the gray matter of your spinal cord. Decision making take place here, and the command of your spinal cord go out of the spinal cord by this red line. This red line here is called anterior root, and the anterior root is only composed of motor axon. So the sensory axon come to the posterior, and the motor axon come out of your ventral horn. Then these two nerves, sensory and the motor, come near each other, and they are wrapped by a connective tissue which is dura mater, and I will talk about it in the next slide. And when the dura mater wrap both of them together, we call this part a spinal nerve. And then the spinal nerve come out of the intervertebral foramen, and then it goes to different parts of the body, and I will show you in the next picture. So again, here you can see in the other side, this is the sensory axon which come to the dorsal horn of your spinal cord. Integration take place in your gray matter, and then the motor axon come out of the ventral horn and go to your organs. You see that when these two nerves wants to pass through intervertebral foramen, the dura mater wrap them. And this is the spinal nerve which you can see here. In this picture, besides the posterior root, which is only sensory, and the anterior root, which is only motor, you have the other structure. I hope you remember the meaning of ganglia. The ganglion is the accumulation of nerve cell bodies which we have in our peripheral nervous system. Please turn off your microphone. And here, in this way, where the sensory axon wants to come to our dorsal horn of the spinal cord, we have accumulation of nerve cell bodies in this part. out of our central nervous system or inside the peripheral nervous system. This accumulation make the structure, which we call it posterior root ganglia or dorsal root ganglia. I hope you remember what is this type of neuron. This type of neuron which you have in the sensory part of your spinal cord are pseudo-unipolar neuron. You see that here is the cell body. Let me draw the picture here for you. You have one cell body here. One extension come out of your cell body, and then this extension divides into two parts. Do you remember this is the pseudo-unipolar neuron? All of our sensory neurons which come to our spinal cord are like this, and we call them and all of these cell bodies are accumulated in the dorsal root ganglia, and you can see it in the way of your posterior root. This is the other structure which you have in your spinal cord. The spinal cord protected by bone, meninges, and cerebrospinal fluid. So the bone of our vertebral column, the different layers of meninges, and the cerebrospinal fluid can protect our spinal cord from outside. The vertebral column houses the spinal cord. The cord passes through the vertebral canal, and each spinal nerve, pay attention, each spinal nerve can exist through an intervertebral foramen. So each intervertebral foramen can only pass one spinal nerve. And you know that one spinal nerve is composed of one sensory, which come inside, and one motor, which goes out. And the spinal nerves are called mixed nerves, because they contain both sensory and motor neuron. Now, about the meninges which we have for our spinal cord. I will talk about this slide in the next picture. Okay, look at this picture. In this picture, you can see your spinal cord. This is the spinal cord which is located in the vertebral column, and these are the bones of your vertebrae. You can see the gray matter inside and the white matter outside. Your gray matter has two dorsal horns and two ventral horns. You have gray commissure which can attach the right side and the left side of gray matter together. And you can see the central canal in the center of your spinal cord. Here you can see the dorsal column or dorsal funiculus. You have ventral column or ventral funiculus. You have two lateral columns on both sides. You can see the posterior median sulcus and the anterior median fissure in this picture. In this picture, you can see the sensory neuron which come to the dorsal horn and the motor neuron which leaves the ventral horn. And then the dorsal and ventral are wrapped by the dura mater, and they can make the spinal nerve as you see in this picture. Our spinal cord is protected by meninges, like our brain. But the meninges of the spinal cord and the brain are little different from each other. The meninges in our spinal cord has only 3 layers. The first layer of meninges is the layer which is attached to our spinal cord from outside. We call it pia mater. The pia mater is very similar to the pia mater of the brain. It means that it attached to the surface of the spinal cord and it goes down in the sulcus or in the fissure, like the pia mater of the brain, which go down in the sulci and come up on the gyri of our brain. After that, we have the next layer, which we call it arachnoid matter. Here you can see the arachnoid matter. The arachnoid matter is the layer which is not attached to your pia mater, as you see in this picture. This is the arachnoid matter. Between the pia mater and the arachnoid matter, you have a space, this brown space, and this is called subarachnoid space. And in the subarachnoid space, you have cerebrospinal fluid. Attached to the arachnoid, you have the other layer, which we call it dura mater. The dura mater of our spinal cord and the dura mater of the brain are different from each other. In the brain, our dura mater has two layers. The inner layer is called meningeal layer and the outer layer is called periosteal layer. But in the spinal cord, our dura mater has only one layer, and you can see it here. After that, you have a space here, which we call it epidural space. The epidural space is the space between dura mater and the bone of your vertebrae. This epidural space is full of adipose tissue, and we use it for epidural anesthesia and epidural injections. You know that the adipose tissue are highly vascularized connective tissue. So when we do injection in this part, by these blood vessels, the drug can easily distribute in different parts of our vertebral column and different parts of our body as we wish. So we can use the epidural anesthesia, and I will show you the picture in the next slides. These are the different layers of meninges. So first we have pia mater. After that, we have arachnoid matter. Between pia mater and arachnoid, you have this brown subarachnoid space, and this subarachnoid space is full of cerebrospinal fluid. This fluid can make cushion around your spinal cord and protect your spinal cord more and more. And after that, we have dura mater here. Between dura mater and the bone of our vertebrae, we have epidural space, and in this epidural space, we have adipose tissue full of blood vessels. In this picture, I want to show you one other structure, which we call it denticulate ligament. The denticulate ligament are these two here and here. Are these two ligaments which you can see on both sides of your spinal cord, and it can help attachment of the spinal cord to the vertebrae on two sides. I told you that the diameter of our spinal cord and the length of our spinal cord is less than vertebral column. So we need some structures to fix the spinal cord in its own place. One of these structures, which I showed you, is filum terminale, which is the strand of pia mater which goes down and attach the conus medullaris of your spinal cord to the coccygeal vertebrae. The other structures which we have are these two denticulate ligaments in right and left side. This is one side and this is the opposite side, and it helps attachment of your spinal cord to the vertebral column and fix the structure in its own place. So we don't have any movement, we don't have any tangling of our spinal cord in the vertebral column. So these are the different layers of our meninges and the different spaces here. Again, in this picture, you see the pia mater which attach to your spinal cord outside. You can see the arachnoid matter here. Please turn off your microphone.
I can hear.
Damilola, please turn off your microphone. Here you can see the arachnoid matter. Between the pia mater and arachnoid matter, we have a space. This space is called subarachnoid space. And after that, you can see the dura mater here. Here you see that the dura mater can extend on both sides and it can cover your spinal nerve until your spinal nerve come out of your vertebral foramens. And after that, when it comes out of the vertebral foramen, the epineurium should cover and protect your spinal nerve. We have two different types of injection in our vertebral column and the spinal cord. One of them is called lumbar puncture or a spinal tap. This is a procedure for obtaining and collecting cerebrospinal fluid for medical diagnosis. I will talk about cerebrospinal fluid later in the video of our brain for you. The cerebrospinal fluid composition can help us to diagnose different diseases. For doing lumbar puncture, the needle should pass through the skin, back muscle, and a ligament which is located in the posterior part of our spinal cord, and we call it ligamentum flavum or yellow ligament. We should pass the epidural space and dura mater. When we come and also we should pass the arachnoid matter, and when we come into the subarachnoid space, we can do aspiration of cerebrospinal fluid about 3 to 9 milliliter. And we should do it after lumbar vertebrae number 1. In the adult, most of the times, they can do it above or below than lumbar vertebrae number 4. Look at this picture. In this picture, it shows you that when we want to do lumbar puncture, we should pass the skin first, then the muscle and the yellow ligament. We should pass the dura mater and arachnoid mater. We come to subarachnoid space, and in the subarachnoid space we have cerebrospinal fluid which we can do aspiration. We aspirate it and then we do our different tests on cerebrospinal fluid. Pay attention, we should do it after conus medullaris in this part, because if we do this lumbar puncture above the lumbar vertebrae number 1, we may hurt the spinal cord. So we need to do it when our spinal cord is finished in our vertebral column. And the other procedure is called epidural and spinal anesthesia. I posted one video on your slides. You can check this video for this epidural anesthesia. And in this picture, you can see how this process takes place. When we want to do anesthesia, epidural anesthesia, specifically for childbirth and C-section, we use this technique. We can insert our needle. The needle should pass through the skin, the muscle of the back, and the ligamentum flavum, which you can see here. And then we should come to epidural space. We should not pass the dura mater. In the epidural space, where we have adipose tissue, we can inject the anesthesia. and then by the blood vessels, which we have in this adipose tissue. This anesthesia can distribute in the lower part of our spinal, our vertebral column, and it can make numbness in the lower part of the body, so we can do the surgery after that. For C-sections, the urinary surgery, and some surgeries which we want to do on the lower limb, we can use this epidural anesthesia, because you know that the general anesthesia has its own complications. So for prevention of this complication, we can use this epidural anesthesia. Okay, I talked about the distribution of gray matter for you. I told you that the gray matter is divided into different horns. One of them is anterior and the other one is posterior horn. The posterior horn is the part which can receive a stimulation. It can house the axons of sensory neuron and the cell body of interneuron for us. The anterior horn is the horn which can house the cell body of somatic motor neuron. Somatic motor neuron are the motor neuron which goes to our skeletal muscle and control the function, the contraction and relaxation of our skeletal muscle. And the lateral horns are the new horns which I want to introduce to you. Lateral horns are only present in the thoracic part. All parts of thoracic segment of our spinal cord, T1 to T12, and also L1 and L2. This is the other horn which we have, and it can house the cell bodies of autonomic motor neuron. I hope you remember the first slide in the nervous system. The autonomic motor neuron are the motor neuron which goes to our viscera, our all organs which we have inside the body, and also the blood vessels. And these autonomic motor neuron, which I will talk about it in chapter 15, can innervate your smooth muscle, your cardiac muscle, and all of our glands. In this picture, you can see the lateral horn. You can see a small bump here. We call it lateral horn, lateral gray horn of our spinal cord. And I told you that we have it in the thoracic part and in the first two segments of the lumbar part. And this is a part which can house the visceral motor neuron for us. This is a part of our autonomic nervous system. If you look at this picture, in this picture now, you can see these different locations. Here is our dorsal horn. In the dorsal horn, we have somatic, the house of somatic sensory and visceral sensory neuron. In the lateral horn, you can see the house of visceral motor neuron, and in the ventral horn, you can see the house of somatic motor neuron. So their locations are completely separated from each other. The gray commissure is the horizontal band of gray matter surrounding the central canal. It contains unmyelinated axons connecting the left and right side of gray matter. In the chapter of nervous system, I talked about ganglion and nuclei for you. The meaning of ganglion is the group of cell bodies out of our central nervous system, and the nuclei are group of cell bodies which are located in CNS. We have two types of nuclei in our spinal cord. One of them is called sensory nuclei, which are located in the posterior horn, and they contain interneurons too. We have somatic sensory nuclei, which can receive information and receive signals from our skin, from muscle, and from joints. And we have visceral sensory nuclei, which can receive information from our blood vessels and our viscera, from inside of our body. And the motor nuclei are located in the anterior and lateral horn of our spinal cord, and they contain motor neuron. We have somatic motor nuclei, which can innervate the skeletal muscle, and it's located in the anterior horn. And we have autonomic motor nuclei, which can innervate the smooth muscle, the heart, and our glands, and they are located in the lateral horn of our spinal cord. So this is the distribution of gray matter in our spinal cord. Again, in this picture, you can see all of this information. In this picture, you have the blue line here, the light blue and the dark blue. The light blue shows you somatic sensory nuclei. Somatic sensory means they come from tactile receptors and also your joints and your muscles. The dark blue can show you the visceral sensory. The information comes from the baroreceptors and chemoreceptors which you have inside in your viscera. So this part are all sensory from outside and inside of our body, and it can make posterior or dorsal root for you. In the posterior root, you have a large structure here, which is a posterior root ganglion. And I told you that the posterior root ganglion is the house of these small cell bodies of your sensory neuron, which are pseudo-unipolar. And this part show you the anterior root. In the anterior root, you have two colors. One of them is yellow color. And as you see here, the yellow color starts from the lateral horn of your spinal cord. And it can carry the autonomic or visceral neurons to your effector organs, to the cardiac muscle, smooth muscles, and your glands. And the red part starts from this ventral horn of your spinal cord. In this part, you have somatic motor neuron, and the axon come out of this part and goes to your effector organ, which are skeletal muscles. Both of them together are wrapped by dura mater, and you see that they can make the anterior root for you. This posterior root and anterior root, both of them need to pass through intervertebral foramen. They are wrapped by dura mater. They make a spinal nerve, and they are mixed nerve because they carry the sensory and motor neuron together. And our white matter is divided into different parts. The different parts of our white matter are listed here: posterior funiculus or dorsal funiculus. You can use both of them. Lateral funiculus and anterior funiculus. The white matter is composed of, pay attention, myelinated axon to and from the brain. The posterior funiculus is located between the posterior gray horn and the posterior median sulcus. It contains sensory tract. What is the meaning of sensory tract? Sensory tract means it brings information to our central nervous system. And in posterior funiculus, we have sensory neuron, sensory axon, which go up to our brain and bring information up to our brain. The lateral funiculus is located in the lateral side of our spinal cord. In lateral funiculus, we have two types of tract. Some of them are sensory, they go up to our brain. Some of them are motor, they come down from the brain and go to different organs. If it goes up, we call it ascending. If it comes down, we call it descending tract. And in anterior funiculus, which is located between the anterior gray horn and the anterior median fissure, we have both, again, sensory and motor tracts. It means that we have ascending and descending. So your lateral and anterior funiculus contain sensory and motor tracts, but in posterior funiculus, you only have sensory tracts. And here, I typed it here for you. In the lateral and anterior funiculi, we have ascending and descending, and in posterior funiculi, we have ascending. Pay attention, ascending means sensory and descending means motor. In this picture, you can see the cross sections of different parts, and it wants only to show you that the cross section of different parts of your spinal cords are a little different in their shapes and in their diameter. Here you can see the cervical part, the thoracic, the lumbar part, and the sacral part. You see that the first part, which is the cervical, is the widest part, and when we come down, it becomes smaller and smaller, and in the thoracic part and the lumbar part, we have addition of the lateral horn too for our gray matter. This is the histology of our spinal cord. In the histology of our spinal cord, you have different structures. This part is called posterior horn or dorsal horn. This part is called anterior or ventral horn, and this part is called lateral horn. Here you can see the gray commissure, and in the center of gray commissure you can see the central canal. This part is called your posterior or dorsal column. This part is called anterior or ventral column, and these two parts on both sides are called lateral column. Here you can see the posterior median sulcus, and in this part you have anterior median fissure. Here you have the dorsal root of your spinal cord, which come to your spinal cord. It's sensory, and this is the ventral root, which goes out, and it is motor. And on both sides of your spinal cord, you have these two large structures, and these structures are called dorsal root ganglion. This is the house of the cell bodies of sensory neuron. This is the cross section of a spinal cord, and you have all the information of this histology picture in the lab video. Now, I want to talk about the spinal nerve. I told you that the sensory and motor nerve are wrapped by dura mater, and they can make the spinal nerve. But what happened to this spinal nerve? Look at this picture. In this picture, you can see the spinal nerve here, which is wrapped by dura mater. When it comes out of your vertebral column, this spinal nerve divides to different branches. One of the branches is this one, or this one in the other side. We call it posterior ramus. It goes to the muscle and skin of your back and innervate this part for you. The other branch is thicker and it's called anterior ramus. It goes to the muscle and skin of the front part of your body and innervate this part. And the other part is the other branches is these two branches on each side. We call it rami communicans. And the rami communicans contains sympathetic and parasympathetic branches which wants to innervate your viscera. And I will talk about it in the autonomic nervous system completely. So, when the spinal nerves come out of your vertebral column, it divides into three branches. One of them is called dorsal or posterior ramus. It goes to the muscle and the skin of your back. One of them is called anterior or ventral ramus, which goes to the muscle and the skin of your front. And the other part is called the rami communicans, which goes to the inside of your body to your viscera and innervate this part for you. And here you can see the information of each of these branches. The posterior ramus are a small branch, innervates muscle and the skin of the back. The anterior ramus is large branch. It splits to multiple other branches. It can innervate the anterior part of our body, and also it can innervate the trunk. It can innervate upper limb and also lower limb. And this part can also participate in making plexus, which I will talk about them next time for you. And the rami communicants are small branches of autonomic fibers. They go inside of our body and innervate all of our viscera. Yes, Esther, do you have any question?
Okay.
Esther, do you have any question?
It's okay now. I wasn't hearing. I'm hearing now.
Okay. What about you, Kim?
Is this recorded that I can look at it at another time?
Yes, I'm recording, and then after 2 hours, I can post it on your Blackboard.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. So these are the branches which we have for our spinal nerves. The next part which I want to talk about is the dermatomes. We have a term which we call it dermatomes, and it talks about the distribution of our spinal nerves. The dermatomes are the parallel layers and segments of our skin which are innervated by single spinal nerves. And I will show you in the next picture. Look at here, you can see some strips on the surface of the body. These strips are located in the anterior view and also the posterior view. Each of these strips is innervated by the specific spinal nerve. If you magnify the picture for yourself, you see that, for example, in the groin region, we have L1. The L1 here means that this part is innervated by lumbar spinal nerve number 1. After that, you have L2. It means that this part is innervated by lumbar spinal nerve number 2. Or here in your chest, you have these strips, parallel strips, and each part is innervated by the specific spinal nerve. So if we have any problem, for example, in our inner thigh, it means that our L2 or L3 has problem, maybe we have pressure on the nerves, maybe we have a disconnection here, maybe we have any problem in this part, so these parts become numb or we have problem of sensation in here. You don't need to memorize the number and the picture here. If we have any question on this part, we provide you a picture. Then we ask you, for example, the back of thigh has numbness. Which spinal nerves are affected? You should check the numbers in the back of thigh. Here it writes S1 and S2. It means that the sacral number 1 and sacral number 2 has problem, so we have numbness here. Or when we have problem in the back of neck, it means that C4 or C5 has problem, so we have numbness or pain in the back of neck. We call it Dermatome Map, and you don't need to memorize it, just you need to check the pictures and tell us the problem with different types of spinal nerves. So it can help localize damage to one or more spinal nerves. If we have loss of sensation on medial part of our arm or the forearm, it means that our C8 has problem. So by using this dermatome map, we can easily identify which spinal nerves has problem. And we have a disease which we call it shingles. You know that sometimes the chickenpox virus infection become reactivated during adulthood. The virus of chickenpox sometimes come to the body and it doesn't show the symptoms of the disease during childhood. It's stored in the posterior root ganglia. It is stored there, it's a live virus, and it becomes reactivated when we have some stress, some infections, some problems, and it can make rashes and blisters along the dermatome, as you see here. In this picture, you can see the rashes of which we have for shingles. Most of the time it's unilateral. It's happen only in one side. It's very itchy and painful. And nowadays we have vaccines against it, and we can use different types of NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs to reduce the pain and itch. And the next part which I want to talk about are nerve plexus. Nerve plexus are network of interweaving anterior rami of spinal nerves. Pay attention. The nerve plexus only is created by our anterior rami. Anterior rami of our spinal nerve can make nerve plexus. The anterior rami of the spinal nerve in the cervical region can make cervical plexus, and also the brachial plexus. Our lumbar part can make lumbar plexus. The anterior rami of sacral nerve can make sacral plexus. But we don't have any plexus for the thoracic part, and I tell you why we have this plexus. Look at this picture. The anterior rami of, let me bring the pointer. The anterior rami of the thoracic parts are sandwiched and they are located between the ribs. So they cannot come together and they cannot attach together to make network or plexus. Because of that, we don't have any plexus for the thoracic part. But for the other parts of our body, we have plexus. One of the plexus which we have is called cervical plexus. The cervical plexus is the anterior rami of C1 to C4. And this plexus has a very important nerve, which we call it phrenic nerve, and the phrenic nerve can innervate our diaphragm. This plexus can innervate the neck muscle, the skin of our neck, and parts of our head and the shoulder. Look at this picture. In this picture, you can see C1 to C4. You see that the anterior ramus connected together and make a plexus. And one important nerve, which we call it phrenic nerve, come out of this plexus and innervate our diaphragm. The other plexus which we have is called brachial plexus. It's the anterior rami of C5 to T1, and it can innervate our neck and axillary region. This brachial plexus has three different trunks: superior, middle, and inferior trunk. This plexus can innervate the anterior and posterior part of our upper limbs too. If you look at this picture, you can see this brachial plexus. It comes from C5, C6, C7, C8, and T1. The anterior rami of these nerves connected together and make plexus, and then some important nerves come out of it. One of them is called median nerve, one of them is axillary nerve, one of them is a radial nerve, and these nerves can innervate different parts of our upper limb. You don't need to memorize them. Just you need to know that the brachial plexus is a plexus which can innervate the lower part of your neck and also your upper limb. The other plexus which we have in our body is called lumbar plexus. This is the anterior rami of L1 to L4, and two important nerves come out of it. One of them is the femoral nerve, which can innervate the anterior thigh muscles, and the other one is called obturator nerve, which can innervate the medial thigh muscles. And in this picture, you can see the lumbar plexus, L1 to L4 here, and the obturator nerve and femoral nerve come out of this plexus. And the next plexus which we have is called sacral plexus, which is the anterior rami of L4 to S4. From this plexus, we have a very important nerve, which we call it sciatic nerve. And this sciatic nerve is the largest and longest nerve which we have in our body, and it can innervate the posterior part of our lower limb. And in this picture, you can see the sciatic nerve here. And if you look at the next picture, you see that it's the longest and largest nerve in our body. It can innervate the lower limb in the posterior aspect. And we have a problem which we call it sciatica. Sciatica is the injury which we have to our sciatic nerve. This sciatica can happen when we have pressure on these parts of our sacral spinal nerve by our intervertebral disc. Sometimes we have intervertebral disc hernia. This hernia can make pressure on the nerve. It may be unilateral or bilateral. Most of the times it's unilateral, and that part has a very bad pain in one side of the body. This is about sciatic nerve. I will talk about reflexes next time for you.